I'm not ashamed.
Was it lawful for Jesus to heal somebody on the Sabbath? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Matthew on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 12. We're going to be reading from verses 9 to 14. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Matthew chapter 12, beginning at verse 9. Now when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. Then he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him, how they might destroy him. In our last episode, we discussed Jesus being the Lord of the Sabbath, meaning that he was the creator of the Sabbath, in other words, God, and therefore was the only one who had power over it and could perfectly interpret what was and wasn't allowed to be performed on it. This declaration was made in response to the Pharisees accusing Jesus' disciples of breaking the Sabbath by plucking heads of grain to eat on the Sabbath. Under a strict reading of the law and without context, the physical act of plucking grain on the Sabbath was work, and thus was breaking the Sabbath. But as Hosea 6:6 said, God desires mercy and not sacrifice, and therefore we aren't to use one piece of God's law against doing another piece of God's law. God did require the Jews that they observe the Sabbath, but he also required them to be merciful. Just as David could eat the showbread without sin in 1 Samuel 21, 1-7 because of necessity, so too could Jesus' disciples pluck grain on the Sabbath because they needed to eat as they had been traveling. The context of Matthew 12 continues, and Jesus leaves the fields and goes into the synagogue. It was still the Sabbath day, and so it would naturally be the time to go and worship God, as well as a time for Jesus to interact with and teach the people. At the same time that Jesus was in the synagogue, so too was a man with a withered hand. Now by this time, Jesus had been doing many miracles, so the Pharisees decided to pose Jesus a question, which was, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? This question wasn't asked in order to learn truth. It was asked so they could accuse Jesus of being a false teacher. What happened to the field and Jesus' explanation had mostly been done out of the eyes of the people. So the Pharisees probably thought if they could get Jesus to give a similar answer, then they could accuse him of encouraging people to break the law of Moses and thus stop him from being a popular teacher. Jesus, though, knew their hearts, and instead of answering their question, he posed a question to them, which was, if they owned sheep and one of them fell into the ditch on the Sabbath, would they not stoop down to lift it out? The answer to that question is an obvious yes, for if the sheep wasn't lifted out of the ditch, it would die. Now again, under a strict reading of the law without context, lifting the sheep out of the ditch is work, and thus breaking the Sabbath. But again, doing absolutely necessary work on the Sabbath wasn't forbidden. Neither was being merciful on the Sabbath forbidden. Jesus then asks if a sheep is more valuable than a man. What he means by this is, if it was lawful to be merciful to an animal on the Sabbath, an animal that is less valuable than a man, then it was lawful to be merciful on the Sabbath by healing the man with a withered hand. Note, Jesus didn't go out of his way to find this man, nor did he ask all those who were sick to come to him on the Sabbath day either. But the Pharisees weren't concerned at all about this man. They were merely concerned in trapping Jesus. Jesus, having compassion and mercy on the man, asked the man to stretch forth his hand, and then he healed it. Note again, this miracle was immediate, unlike the so-called faith healers of today, who only perform miracles on ailments we can't see. Now you would think that upon seeing a miracle like this, the Pharisees would immediately believe who Jesus was and would recognize that their attitudes toward him was wrong. But no, their reaction was just the opposite, for they went out plotting against Jesus, how they might destroy him. Why did they react this way? Because their hearts were hardened towards God, and they refused to accept what was right in front of them. This is the response I give to those who think we need miracles today, for people think if only others saw miracles, then more would believe. The scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, and people of that day saw many miracles, and yet many didn't believe. That's because people aren't converted to Christ because of miracles. They're converted through faith and obedience to the Word of God contained in the Bible. Apart from that message, there is no salvation. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Matthew 12, verses 15 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.